welcome back to Teen Story Share. We are in the middle of a series, if you did not know, where we're doing YA novels that have been inspired by folktales, and also some of the folktales that have inspired them. So 2 weeks ago we read a book called Echo North, which was inspired partly by the Norwegian folktale East of the Sun, West of the Moon, and partly by the Scottish folktale Tamlin. So this week we're going to be reading Tamlin. And in case you missed Echo North, I will put a link to that in the description. So we're going to be reading Janet and Tamlin, and the version that I'm reading comes from this collection called Tatterhood and Other Tales, and I'll put the information on that in the description also. And here is the editor's note about this story. Several old ballads about Janet and Tamlin from the border country of Scotland were used by the editor as the source for this story. Tales of humans captured by the fairies or the Queen of Elfland are frequent in Celtic folklore, but not all end as happily as this one does. Oh, and just a quick note on some of the old-fashioned words that are used in this version. A kirtle is basically just an underdress or a dress. And a girdle, back in the old days, it meant just a belt. And I think most people know this, but just in case, bonny just means pretty or beautiful or good looking, and a lass is just a young woman. Alright, Janet and Tamlin. Once upon a time, in the low lands of Scotland, there lived an old earl and his bonny daughter Janet. And on their lands, in the place called Carter Howe, there stood from ancient times a well belonging to the fairy folk. Now Janet had the freedom to go wherever she wished except for one place, and that place was the fairy well at Carter Howe. Indeed, all the village lasses were warned not to tarry at Carter Howe, for it was believed the fairy knights would spirit away any young maid found near the well. Sometimes village folk who must pass by Carter Howe left offerings beside the well to please the fairies and bring good luck to themselves. Janet longed to visit her fairy well to see what she could see. Perhaps she would leave an offering at the well and make a wish for good fortune. So, one fine sunny morning she braided her hair about her head, tucked her kirtle up high above her knees, and hastened off to Carter Howe as fast as she could go. The green meadow was filled with the scent of heather and wildflowers, roses and golden broom. Beside the well stood the ancient hawthorn trees, and there Janet hung a silver pin as an offering. She picked a wild rose to tuck in her hair and bent down to peer inside the dark, cold water of the well. When she looked up, beside the well grazed a splendid white horse with golden trappings. Janet moved away uneasily and picked 2 more roses for her girdle. But then, standing before her was a young man clad in shimmering green. "Why do you pick my roses, lady?" he demanded. "Why do you come to Carter Howe without my leave?" "Without your leave, indeed," cried Janet. "Carter Howe is my father's land. I'll come here if I please." "The flowers are mine, lady. When you plucked the roses, you summoned me." "I'll pluck a rose if I wish," she answered with spirit. "Who are you to claim the flowers of Carter Howe?" "I am the knight Tamlin, from the court of the Queen of Elfland." "I am Janet," she faltered, and grew afraid, for all the warnings and fearful tales she had heard rushed into her mind. Tamlin smiled gently. "I'll not harm you, Janet." "Glad I am to hear it, for I've been forbidden to visit the fairy well," she went on ruefully. "It would be a sad thing indeed if they were proved right." "Will you tarry a while, Janet?" "I will," she said. So they sat and talked together in the fragrant meadow all that summer's day. When evening came, Janet returned home, running lightly through the heather. "No harm has come of it," she said to herself. But she found she thought only of Tamlin, and a few days later she was back at Carter Howe, picking the wild roses at the well. At once Tamlin appeared at her side. After that, Janet went to the fairy well often. Tamlin confessed he haunted the well, waiting for her summons, and Janet thought there was no place she'd rather be than at Carter Howe with Tamlin. As the summer waned into autumn, Janet grew sad and quiet. She realized she loved Tamlin, and to love a knight from Elfland was, she knew, a hopeless thing. The maids saw her moping and whispered that Janet had a lover, and her father noticed she was not like her usual merry self at all. "What ails you, lass?" he asked kindly. "Is it dull here in the castle? Perhaps it's time you were wed. If there's no young laird you fancy hereabouts, we'll go off to Edinburgh and see what we can find there." But Janet just shook her head. The very next day Janet hurried off to Carter Howe, and when Tamlin stood beside her she said, "Tell me truly, Tamlin, are you mortal man or fairy spirit?" "I was a mortal man," he sighed. "I was the Earl of Roxburgh's grandson. But one day, riding on the hunt, my horse stumbled and I was thrown hard to the ground. 'Twas on a fairy hill, so as I lay stunned, the Queen of Elfland seized me and took me in to be her knight. I liked it very well at first. Now, since I've met you, Janet, I want to return to the real world. If I were free, I'd ask your pledge to marry me." "And I'd say yes," answered Janet. "Is there no way you can leave the fairy world?" Tamlin shook his head sadly. "The Queen's enchantment is strong, and she has refused to let me go." "I'll marry no one but you, Tamlin, and I'll not give you up easily. Is there no way to break the enchantment?" "There is but one way to free me. It's a fearful way, and I doubt that any mortal lass could do it." "I will do it," said Janet, "if you will tell me what it is." "Next week comes Halloween. On that night the Queen and all her knights and company ride abroad. You must wait for us near the well at Miles Cross, but stay hidden, you must not be seen. At midnight we will be riding past. It is then you must run out and drag me from my horse." "How will I know which is you among all that company, Tamlin?" "Let the first group of 3 riders pass, and then the second. I will be in the 3rd company. One knight will ride a black steed, and the other a brown. But I will ride a pale gray steed on the outer side. My right hand will be gloved, my left hand bare. By this you will know me." "I will be there," she promised. "Run quickly to the gray steed, and pull the rider down. The fairy host will raise the cry, 'Tamlin is away!' Hold me fast, and do not let me go. They'll change me to a wild beast or a snake, but you must hold me fast within your arms, no matter what terrible shape I take. Fear not, I'll do you no harm. They'll turn me into a red-hot bar of iron, and at the very last they'll turn me into a burning coal. Then quickly throw the coal into the well water, and I'll become a human naked man. Cover me with your cloak, and keep me out of sight until the fairy hosts are gone." "I will do all that," said Janet. "I will not fail you, Tamlin." An hour or 2 before midnight on Halloween, Janet quietly left the sleeping castle. The night was dark and gloomy, and the large branches of the ancient oaks creaked and groaned with the wind. She wrapped her cloak around her and set out for Miles Cross. The dry leaves on the path skittered and rustled as though they were alive. Dark shadows seemed to press around her, and she hurried on. When she reached the well at Miles Cross, she hid herself in the bracken and bushes nearby. Here there was no sound but the wind sighing through the trees. She waited so long she feared the fairy host would not be coming that night. Then, a little before midnight, she heard the jingle of fairy bells on bridles. The music of the bells grew clearer, and the strange elfin glow of fairy folk showed her the Queen riding at the head of the fairy company. Her long golden hair gleamed as it lay over her shoulders, and over her shimmering green mantle. A company of 3 knights rode behind her, and behind them a second company of knights. Janet let them pass. In the 3rd company were a knight on a black steed and a knight on a brown. The 3rd knight, on the pale gray steed, rode on the outer side. His right hand was gloved, his left hand bare. Janet ran out to the pale gray steed and caught the bridle. She seized hold of the knight and dragged him to the ground. From the fairy host a fearful shriek rang out, "Tamlin is away!" She felt Tamlin shrink in her arms to become a slippery, wriggling lizard, but she held it fast. The lizard turned into a scaly snake, twisting and coiling in her arms, but she did not let it go. The snake became a lean wolf with wide, snapping jaws, but she gripped it tightly in her arms and did not let it go. The wolf turned into a large, shaggy bear with huge paws and sharp teeth. She dug her fingers into the fur and hung on with all her might. The bear became a fierce lion with large fangs, who threw her to the ground, but she held fast and did not let go. Then the lion became a bar of red-hot iron in her hands. She gritted her teeth and staggered to her feet, but would not drop it. At last the iron bar became a glowing coal, and this she threw into the well. A cry of rage went up from the fairy host. By the unearthly elfin light she saw Tamlin climb naked from the well, and quickly threw her cloak over him, hiding him from their sight. The queen cried out angrily to Janet, "You have taken my best knight! If I had known Tamlin would be taken from me, I'd have turned his eyes to wood and his heart to stone." With that, the fairy host rode off into the night, the eerie glow fading, the golden bridle bells jingling faintly in the distance. In the silence and the dark, Janet crouched near the well, still holding Tamlin closely in her arms. She knew that Tamlin was now free, and that he would be her heart's delight. I hope you enjoyed this week's story, and join us again next week for probably another folk tale. Alright, have a great weekend. Bye!